All right, guys. So we're gonna take up this FullStack Lab one. We're gonna try to do this and cut a video. Let's see if we can get through this, and it's pretty useful in this format. So we're gonna take up this FullStack Lab one on ES6 practice exercises. So the idea was that you basically try to do this work without having to use Stack Overflow. But you know what? Sometimes you're gonna need that. I just went go to it, right away and start searching for the answers right away. You need to struggle a little bit with this stuff, so you'll learn it, and then you can always go and search those help forums and things like that. It kind of sticks better in your mind when you do that, because when you struggle through something and then you see the solution, you'll kind of understand a little bit better. So exercise one was using ES syntax to write a function that will get the difference between a given number and 13. If the number is greater than 13, then return double the absolute difference. So really, what we were looking to do was use our ES syntax, which was the fat arrow function, and using some conditional JavaScript, if else kind of thing. So the solution was looked like this. So again, using Visual Studio Code, usually how I do these things is I usually create a folder for each one of my exercises just quickly so I can navigate through them, and you don't have to do it this way. You can create your JavaScript files, however you want to do it. But if you have a lot of files, it's better to put them in their own directory. And when I'm using this Visual Studio Code, as mentioned, you can go to the terminal window, start a new terminal, and this will put you in this command line here. You can always use the command line prompt from here if you're more comfortable, but that might be a little bit scary to some people. It's all your preference. This is actually built into Visual Studio Code, so you can actually look at the code and run it as you're working, right? So first thing, as we talked about in our last lecture, if you have Node installed, you can quickly hit Node.js. You'll get the console, so you know it's running. And to exit out of it, we need to do Control-C to exit out. You don't need to necessarily do these inside of Node.js. You could have created this in one of the REPLs, the online JavaScript repository for some of this. Since it is just JavaScript, you could have run it in that, or you could have run it in a text file and used your browser. You could have done that as well. But because we're going to be using Visual Studio Code for our Node.js development, I'm going to just do this little solution video inside of this environment. So again, it was the difference of a given number and 13. So here's what it looked like when I ended up doing this. So I created a function. I used the const variable, so a named function, and using the short form again. I used the arrow syntax, and inside of that I had the conditional statement. Again, this is using ES syntax, but really what this would look like is, if you were to do the long way, it would be function, and it would look like this, right? You would have all of that inside of there. It just allows you, again, to get rid of this typing function all the time. So this arrow keyword here, this arrow symbol, and that kind of shorthand eliminates this kind of syntax, having a function and kind of it's kind of like a lambda expression. It's just a short form, right? And again, the var keyword in vanilla JavaScript is just variable, but it allows for dynamic typing. So what can happen is diff can be overwritten somewhere else in your program. It could be later on in this JavaScript. If you had old JavaScript script or an application, somebody could come along and just say diff is an object, or it's an integer, or it's another function entirely. I gave an example of how that's dangerous. If you were working in a banking software and you had, say, a function called transaction or deposit or something like that, something very very specific to the business, that's very does a critical thing, critical functionality, somebody could come along in some other part of the application and say deposit does something else, right? Maybe maybe the original one was deposit to Canadian account, and somebody came by and said deposit is now in USD. That's not, that is critical in terms of a, or maybe that deposit, you know, empties out the bank account. Who knows what it could do? So it's kind of dangerous. So constant is a way in ES6 to lock things down so that nobody else could come along and define it again. So if you were to run that, there'd be a problem, right? There'd be an error saying that somebody is trying to overwrite difference, and it would throw an error. So if I were to run this here, given 32 and 11, you know, we expect that, okay, what's happened here? So we want to cancel out of this, can get in Control C, and we want to run node x1, the script file. So we have 38 and 2, right? So what happens is 38 gets entered. Is it less than 13? Return 13 minus 1. If you notice here, I have this thing called prettier, so it automatically kind of formatted my text for me and put it on one line. So what happened here is if it's 32, if it is less than 13, it'll subtract 13 minus n. Otherwise, it returns 32 minus 13 times 2, right? So just a little bit of math there and some conditional JavaScript. You know, again, short form, the way it did is put it on one line, but it can be a little confusing for people, right? If you look at that quickly, it's better maybe to space it out. Again, if I were to come along here with that syntax here, const, if I were to say var difference now equals 5, when I run this, it should actually give me an error here. By the way, on the command line, you can actually use up and down arrow key on your keyboard and flip through some of your previous commands. It's just good so you don't have to keep retyping it. So if I go to run this now, it should give me an error right away saying difference has already been declared, and basically it's the ES6. It's basically because of the constant now, we cannot define it again, so it works as expected. All right, using this video tool, it actually allows me to pause the video a little bit sometimes, and maybe I need to take a break or switch screens. So it's actually really helpful. So it's the magic of it, video editing or recording. So you can quickly, you know, look something up or you know, even just get something gathered for the next set, right? So we'll move on to number 2, exercise 2. So this one was rewrite the following code block using ES6 syntax using the const, let, arrow function, template literals, and for of. So this right here is just an example of some old school vanilla JavaScript using the function. By the way, in this example, counter was passed in. I think I wanted to use it, but it's not really used there. You could remove that if you wanted to and not have to pass it in. Maybe that was a little confusing, but probably what the thought was is you could use counter instead of the length of the array, you know, to control it, but that might have been some other coding. I had another example I was looking at, so it might have been a bit confusing there, and counter wasn't necessarily used, and you can tell by how it's grayed out there. It kind of lets you know that it's not used. But the point was rewrite this whole thing in ES6 syntax, and we'll take a look at that. So by the way, if you are not familiar with the command line, you can see at the bottom here, you can change directory by going cd ... So that will take you back one directory. And if you go dir, that on Windows, I mean, I know iOS is a little different, maybe Linux is a little different as well, but in Windows environment, you may not need to look it up for your own system, but dir, that shows the directory. So now I want to go into, I want to put I want to put my focus of the command line inside of the right directory, otherwise I can't run things. It's very important also when you're running the node command, you know, you want to kickstart something, you gotta make sure you're in the directory that the actual file is in, right? So I go exercise 1, and I go dir, so I see start and finish. So if I wanted to quickly look at the start right here is, again, vanilla JavaScript, greeter, hello, counter, and it does something with it. So really what I could do is just kind of get rid of this guy right here, this parameter and this counter, because I don't really need it anymore. That was just part of the example. It wasn't used. So if I go in there and I just say node start.js, All right, well, I get exactly what we wanted. We wanted to append hello to each name. Hello, Randy Savage. Hello, Ric Flair. Hello, Hulk Hogan. If you're not a wrestling fan, you have no idea who those guys are. If you are a wrestling fan from way back in the 80s, you will know exactly who those guys are. I just used them for some inside joke, I guess you could say. All right, so this is what it looks like. So we want to start to modify this. So we'll look at what we do quickly. So really, what it was you could, if you want to start doing some live coding here, what I want to do is I want to use a const. I want to use a name, and I want to use that arrow function. So right away, I can get rid of this because I'm going to be using that arrow function. I'm going to keep this array. This parameter can be named anything, and I'm going to use that arrow function. So now I basically remove that function keyword, and then again, var is an older kind of variable assigner, so we can use let. Let gives the block scope. Again, let allows scoping within the function. Because what could happen there is if it was var greet text here and var greet text up here, that we have a potential of overwriting. It could be an empty object here. We have a potential of overwriting this global variable, right, in that global scope. And that was again some of the problems of JavaScript, that scoping is not handled in the same way you'd expect it in, say, Java or C# or things like that, right? So let is a way to allow you to kind of enforce scope. So we'll just kind of undo this with Control Z, right? Oh, I don't want to do that. I want to. Okay, let's just forget that, and we'll go back and walk up and put the let keyword here. So now we have a little block scope here over this function. If we were to go inside and do another let inside of here, now that gives scope to inside of the for block, right? If we want to go through, then this outer scope will not be affected. If we return greeter text, it would be this outer scope. This would only be contained inside of this scoped expression, right? So that's what we're talking about there. So console log, this old school way of combining text is, again, vanilla JavaScript is an easier way. And I'll look at so if I were to actually use template literals, which is that backtick, right, up the upper left, you can then walk up to it and, add some text, or right away you can, so if you were to wanted to say this is the answer, and you don't have to worry about concatenating things, and then you use the $ parentheses, and that'll actually evaluate the value of it inside of the template literal. Again, you could use the $, so my array index. So what that does, what's really nice about it is it's a string that you don't have to concatenate these different pieces with that plus symbol. And inside of this literal, this template, it's actually a template, it'll actually respect those blank spaces there, which is really good, because normally you would have to do something like this. You would have to sometimes, you'd say, this is the answer, right? Answer. It's really annoying. Extremely, I can't even find the tick here. So we'd have to do something like this, and you'd have to concatenate things like that, and then sometimes you'd have to actually go through the habit of creating spaces with pluses. It just was a pain, to be honest. Like, all the time you're working like that. So this is a nice clean way of doing that. So right away we have that template literal, and to be honest, I forget the exact syntax to the for of. So we're going to look at the finished example, but it's going to look like this. So the for of, okay, so exactly what I had said here. So again, we don't need this. So we're using defaulting here. We can get rid of this counter, and we can get rid of this here. So you can already tell that it's already looking a lot smaller and a lot more concise, right? So we have a let keyword here. So the for of already, it keeps track of the index for you. You don't have to go through each index of the array. And when I mean index, you don't have to go through and keep track of this kind of thing, right? Array, and the place is 0, placeholder 0, my array, right? You don't need to do that. So this for of takes care of that for you. If you notice in the original JavaScript part here, we have to go up and we have to create an index. We have to check if the index, we have to check when we've gone through the entire index, and not to make sure we don't go past the length of it. And then we have to increment it. So there's a lot of work just to set up going through an array here. So what this does is small syntax. It does a for of, so for name inside of that array, and it internally keeps track of the length and the index, and it knows exactly what position you're at. So it's a nice little shorter syntax for you. Now, mind you, like I said, when this gets compiled down, it gets compiled down to something that looks like this inside the JavaScript engine, the compiler, right? So again, it'll take this ES syntax and translate it back to this anyways. But it again, when we're working at this on this level of abstraction up, we're writing more smaller and smaller and smaller uh, uh, scripting, right? We're more syntax that does more powerful things. Therefore, our code gets a lot simpler and a lot cleaner, and we don't have to worry about a lot of stuff. And that goes for a lot of stuff with EX6, especially with classes and kind of inheritance that we get into later on. But for this, it's much shorter and much cleaner, and we get the exact expected result. So let's say here finished. Finish.js, we run it, we get exactly what we want. It works as expected, so that's exercise number 2. So exercise 3 might have been a little confusing. I read it now. It said use array proto.map. Again, when we are using all of this stuff, we can look at the JavaScript library MSDN online. That'll give you a markup of all how to use this stuff. And it gives you, I would say always keep that open as a guideline for you when you're doing your work. Always refer back to that. It gives you explanation to what this stuff is. Otherwise, you're just you're walking around in the dark. You don't want to be doing that. It's hard enough to program from memory. You're not going to remember how everything works. Syntax especially, it's like a language in itself. You need to know how to speak the language. You need to look back to the language guide. So this one says use the map to create a function to use the capitalize method in exercise 2 to uppercase the first characters and then apply it to everything. So what I meant by that, and I might have said it in the lab, was use the capitalization. Now this from the previous lab, because I had actually split this up a little bit for you guys. So take that it may be a little confusing, but take that function that you had created from that lab 1 and use it to create a function that will basically pass that function by reference and apply it to all these things. So I'll actually show you how we did that. So this was the function that we had kind of built the previous lab, and what it did was it took a parameter. And so again, using the ES syntax, what it does is it would uppercase the first letter. So foo bar will become foo, and the rest of it will be bar, and then the rest of it lowercase it. So again, that was confusing enough. If you had to use vanilla JavaScript, you have to do a lot of work here. You would have to iterate over each character in the string, and then you'd have to maybe create a new array and push the result in, and you'd have to kind of split the first one and uppercase it, and then do something with the result. So there's a lot of work going on. So with ES6 syntax, we talked about the spread operator, and what you can do is this is called destructuring, right? So basically, what that does is it'll take this string and it'll split it up in this way. So first, it would take first, and then it'll destructure the rest, right? So it's going to take first, it's going to break it up. It's going to break it. So internally what happens is it'll look at that string and it'll break it into a list of characters. And using this syntax here, which is a little confusing, but it's basically array destruction. If you look up on it, I'll explain it, how to use it. It'll break this up and it'll take the first value, and then this dot 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 will copy the rest of it into its own parameter. So you would end up getting something like this in first, and then the second you would have the rest of it, right? You would have the rest of that. And what's going to happen here is it's going to use those string functions. So it's going to grab this string and it's going to uppercase it with the 2 uppercase, and then you're going to plus this, which is concatenating the rest, and this is going to go and apply everything to join by its empty string to lowercase. So it's going to put the rest of it to lowercase and then combine it back out. So we already went over that in lab 1, and we already know that we have this in our tool set. So what I was getting at inside of exercise 3 was saying use that method that we have and apply it to another function that uses the map operator. So what I meant was you would just take all of this. So this is like a utility function now that can be used, a predicate, whatnot, and we can use it inside of here. So we basically copied this. We have a list of colors there, which I don't think we need this here, to be honest. So we have this this function that, oh, we do. I'm sorry, we do because we were calling it down here. But we don't necessarily need it here. So what we're doing here is we have this function and we're walking up this array right here. And on this array, this prototype, there is a map. So we're going to go through and we're going to use map and we're going to pass in capitalized function that we had defined here into it here. So basically what it's going to do is it's going to go through, it's smart enough to know that this is an array, and inside this map function it's going to know, so if you hover over it, it'll actually give you a little bit of information, calls a defined callback function on each element of an array and returns an array as the result. So it's going to go through each element and it's going to apply something to it. It's going to map something and transform each value, and it's going to return a result. So it's going to go through here, this array, and map each element and pass it through the capitalization part of it. So that's basically, it's going to go through red, it's going to go through this, it's going to uppercase R, and then it's going to join the rest in lowercase. And then it's going to go through green, same thing, it's going to uppercase green, lowercase the rest, and it's going to go through blue, and the same thing. And that's basically what it is. That's powerful, right? The map keyword will do internally a for loop for you and do all of the transformations on each element of the string, and it's going to output it. It's going to look like this. So that's what is expected. Now let's run this, and expect that we're going to get the result. So again, we're back in this command line here. CD back to go back one directory. We're going to go back into exercise 3, and we're dir to see it, and node start.js. And there's the expected result for that. All right, so exercise 4 is in the same way. We're still using arrays, and we're using that the different new methods that ES6 adds to arrays. So for JavaScript, so we have, in the next example, we want to use filter. So using filter, create a function that will filter out all the values in the array that are less than 20. So we have an array, and inside of that values array, you can type values.filter, and then you can pass in some expression that'll filter out everything that's less than 20. And that can be done two ways. It can be either done inline or it can be another external function, but you need to know how to use that reference. So if you need to use that reference, you could just, if you can't find it, you just go Google and you go JavaScript reference. It's usually going to be this top one here, the MDN, and then you come to this nice reference guide, and then you use the search bar up here, and maybe you want to say array filter. Array filter will come up, and you should have it right here, array.prototype.filter, and we get some nice examples on how to do it. So this would be an array of strings, and here we do words.filter, and there's an inline expression here. So each element here will say, is the word greater than 6? If so, then we filter it, and it returns an array result of all the words that are greater than 6. Again, internally, it's going to do some type of for loop. It's going to do some logic to check and probably build another array for you and all that stuff. And we got all of that work in one line of code here. So you don't need to worry. ES6 has all of that logic built in. So going back to what we want, we would actually go through and we would say, look at, where are we here? Exercise 4. So we have this value, and what I did is I created a function right here, a named function. Again, I wasn't using ES syntax there, I should have. Basically it's going to say values less than 20, and then inside of this array, I filter values less than 20, and it's going to go through each number, and it's going to pass into this function, and it's going to do that return value. It's going to return true, false, and it's going to know which ones to filter and which ones to keep. So you could actually, let's just go here and clear this up, right? So let's use our let keyword because we're talking about ES6, right? We could go through like this. Again, we want to be mindful of what we're trying to do here with ES6. We want to use that syntax that we've been on JavaScript. So I can transform this back into like an array arrow function, sorry, right here is not the right way. We can go like this, and we can, there we go. So it looks a little bit nicer there. And now we can pass in less than 20 into there and use it as a filter, but we can also we could also do something like this inline. We could do something like this, x is less than 20, and that's the same, right? But for debugging purposes and clarity of code, it's probably better to keep it outside so you know exactly what you're doing. And then we can actually call that and get the expected result. So again, cc.dd, we want to go to right directory. I'm going to make this a little bit, I'll start a video where I'm actually in the right directory next time. Node start.js, and what happened there? So it says value has already been declared, so it doesn't like this double declaration here. So I got rid of that, and I run the call node start.js and get 1 and 5. So basically it went through this entire list and it filtered out all the values that are less than 20, which ends up being just the 1 and 5, and therefore we got the right expected result right there. All right, last question was a challenge here. It was use the prototype reduce function. So again, basically using in the same line as filter and map, we're going to use the reduce ES6 function to create the sum and product of any given array. So basically what it's going to do is reduce as a name. It's going to return a result, one result. It's not going to return an array. It's going to go through each element of that array and do something, transform those values, but somehow into one combined result. So what we had here is calculate sum. So basically it's going to go through all of these in a way and add everything up and then return 10 as a result. So the sum of the array. The next one is going to be the product. So the product it's going to go through and a product is going to multiply all the values together by themselves. So 1 times 2 equals 2 times 3 equals 6, and then 6 times 4 will equal 24. That's basically what we're after. Again, using the JavaScript reference guide is going to show us here how to do that. To be honest, here's one of the answers right here. You would go through with the reducer and it would basically add the values together. So we'll add the accumulated value to the current value. So 1 plus 2 equals 3 will be the accumulation, right? Then there'll be the next value, plus 3. So then the next time around, it'll say, okay, now 6, which is the sum of all of these, plus the next value, the current value, which is 4. So then it's going to return, it's going to go through all of those iterations, and it's going to output 10, right? And this is how we call it. So what we did is inside of this, so this is what it looks like. So we have this in an array, and on the array, the prototype, there is a reduce. That's going to take the accumulation and the value, the current value, and it's going to apply it. So it's going to do accumulation plus value, and let's see here. What did we say here about this? Right, so it's going to go through there. Same thing. It's going to go through with the product, and it's going to go and reduce it. So if we hover over this, by the way, it'll actually say calls the specific callback function for all elements in an array, and then return a value of the callback function as the accumulated result. So here we go. So if we were to run this here and we say dir to make sure we're right here, start.js, it's going to go through each one and basically apply this function to it. So the first one, we're incrementing all values in the array, and the second one, in the product, we're actually multiplying each value of the array, and then it is returning one result. So the one result is either 10 or 24. So that was the challenge question on how to use reduce. I mean, there's a lot of other ones in the MSDN. If you were to scroll down and look through some of the other methods, if you were curious, you wanted to play with some of these. Here's reduce. We already got into the string functionality. There's map, there's push. So there's a lot of things in there that you can play with if you wanted to look at further. How to flatten an array, how to fill an array. So there's a lot of stuff that is built. Sort of stuff is when I mean methods built onto the array object. So that's ES6, and that was our challenge question, and that wrapped up that lab number 2.